We have an exciting group of product managers from a variety of fields here to talk to us about trends and innovations in digital products. I'll start by introducing our moderator, and then they'll introduce themselves. Our moderator is John Canning, the VP of New Media and the chairman of the New Media Council for the Producers Guild of America. His resume includes former VP of product at Disney, as well as roles at Yahoo, Microsoft, Cisco. He's founder of Media Sherpa, a consulting and production media company. John, would you please take it from here?
Thank you. I didn't think you would actually read that thing, but that's okay. Good morning, everyone. How are you doing? Oh, fantastic. I've never seen so many gluttons for punishment on a Saturday morning. This is fantastic. But thank you very much for coming out and desperately trying to absorb all this product knowledge. I just wanted to start off with a quick question. How many of you have actually shipped a product in this room? How many of you were entirely happy with the product you shipped and it matched the vision you started with? I like, there's one woman, there's another person up there, they're like, I got it. I think that almost defines what we're hoping to get into today, which is a conversation, and we will be having a conversation, not just amongst us, talking amongst ourselves. We're going to be sharing some anecdotes, and then we hopefully will get questions for yourselves and thoughts and opinions. But it is having that conversation about we're all on this road of delivering a product. Some of you may have never shipped a product before and are trying to figure out what it's about. Some of you are veterans of shipping more products than you can care to think about, and you're still hoping to have that Nirvana product that you're happy with and that the customers love. But we have a panel today that I think we've all had our battle scars, some of which we will share, some we'll just cringe at. Some will talk in vague terms because we're under NDA. But what we do hope to do is get some thoughts out there, but like I said, we'll be talking a bit, but then I want to quickly open this up to a conversation because that's what it's about. It's asking those questions and getting that knowledge. So with that, yeah, there's oh wow, good God, look at us. Note to self, you're on the big screen up there. All right, with that, I'm just going to let the panelists go ahead and go down the row, introduce themselves, and say who they're working for today, and then we'll dig into it. Josh.
Great. Hi, I'm Josh Snow. I'm the Vice President of Product at Fullscreen. I've been there about 9 months, so relatively new, although a lot of people there are relatively new. And I'm focused with my team on our SVOD service that we launched at the end of April. Yeah, that's it.
I'm Chris Anderson. I'm VP of Product at GameFly. We do subscription game rentals. I've been there about 6 years. And we're currently building a new part of our business, which is kind of exciting, which is actually streaming video games from the cloud, all server-side to smart TVs and Amazon Fire sort of low-power devices. So it's a new line of business for us, and that's had some challenges.
That's a loaded statement.
Yeah. I'm Hans Koo. I'm a Chief Product Officer at Flipagram. It's a social media startup in LA. And been there for about a year. I come from DreamWorks, Disney, Yahoo. Started a company and sold it to Yahoo. Actually doing something very similar to what we're doing now. But yeah, it's been a challenge, and it'd be great to talk to you guys soon.
I'm Jody Belliveau, and I've been working this last year with Weaver, delivering the virtual reality distribution platform called Transport. And before that, I was at Disney, where I delivered Disney Movies Anywhere.
So just a few products across the space here. One of the things is I'm the chairman of the New Media Council for the Producers Guild, but I also work at NBC. And I'll start the confessional, which is what I think I'm going to start this at, is hi, I'm John, and I'm going to tell you about my failed product. One of the things I said to all the panelists today is let's talk about our failures. Let's talk about that thing that we did that it was just the biggest, gnarliest thing that we wish we could have gotten through, but we didn't. So with that, I can talk about the challenges, and I'll dial it way back to the Microsoft days when I worked at Microsoft and was shipping a version of something they called Windows XP Media Center. And we were developing a product outside of Windows, but on Windows, that had the definition of being probably one of the first PVRs in the market, being connected to a television in the living room, a PC connected to the television in the living room, and this was early 2000s. It was taking and slaving your cable system to this PC and routing it to the television. And we had the challenge of delivering a product that we had to satisfy the consumer, and we had designers that were developing for the consumer. We had to satisfy and deal with 5 major PC companies, who were the people that were actually shipping the product. And then we had to work with all the network operators out there who weren't really happy that we were supplanting their set-top box device. So at the end of the day, we were developing a product that was almost doomed and challenged from the get-go. That the ultimate product that we wanted to ship and the design and the UI that we wanted to ship, we couldn't, because we couldn't get native access to the cable operators' signals. We had to go through a set-top box, which required plugging a little plastic dongle on the front of their box and slaving their box. And we had to ship, I will say this now, really ugly PC products, because HP, Dell, Lenovo, those type of companies were making innovative product design. So we had the software that we wanted to delight a customer with, the product. I mean, you could record TV, you could skip 30 seconds ahead, and this was early 2000s. We were doing all of those things. We were basically building interactive television. You could have full internet access. You could play games on your 60-inch television, not need an Xbox. But we had to ship through 5 PC manufacturers, which their notion of a sexy PC was a gray box that was ugly and stood like this. So from that, it really taught me that lesson that you have to figure out how to balance those needs out. And Microsoft eventually figured it out, as well as other companies, is that sometimes you have to buck the norm. You have to do some things yourself. Apple certainly figured it out with them, saying, you know what, we don't care about this. Our supply chain is vertically integrated. We don't care about a third party. We will ship what we want to the consumer. They made that choice. When you find yourself stuck in another position of having to think about that, then you are sometimes caught in the malaise of trying to please everybody. And the short answer is we didn't. And that product continually was challenged in the marketplace because we were trying to satisfy different constituencies all at the same time and not picking a clear constituency to say, this is how we're going to do it. And let's face it, we should have picked the consumer. We should have said, you know what, damn it, we're going to go down that path. But it was too risky on the business side, it was too risky to the partners, and we eventually made a product that just wasn't getting out there in front of the consumers. People that used it delighted, but it was too many steps down that path. And so I'd say the one thing we learned is you've got to keep those things in mind. You've got to keep those things in mind and know and how to balance them out and say, ultimately, what is it going to take for my product to succeed? All right, now it's your confessional, sir.
Okay. Yeah, so we were asked to think about, a failure. And as I thought about it, they say
You've
that...
never failed.
No, actually the exact opposite. Because I look back at everything that I've worked on, and I'm a little bit embarrassed about pieces of all of them, right? And they say if you're not embarrassed by your past work, then you're not really, you're not growing, you're not learning. One specific example, I worked at a company called Pseudo.com in sort of 99, 2000. Does anyone remember Pseudo.com? One person. All right. Sweet. You were our audience. You were the dude who was watching. All right. It was a very early version of television on your computer. So we were in New York City. We produced a bunch of content geared towards sort of young, hip, urbanites. There was shows about hip hop and shows about sports and a bunch of other stuff. And we had this awesome studio. And we were on 60 Minutes, where our founder told the guy on 60 Minutes that we were going to be bigger than CBS. That didn't quite happen. My first week actually there was the week that the .com bubble burst in 2000. So it was like, oh God, what the fuck did I just do? Sorry.
Developing product does require cursing.
Yes, it does. A lot of cursing. So we had this product where people could go onto their computer and watch these shows either live or on demand, and they could chat with each other. And we actually figured out how to push like additional information to the screen that was timed with that was it sort of triggered by the stream itself, and it was really cool. The problem was everyone was on like a 56K dial-up. The video was about a postage size stamp about this big and 16 bits per second or whatever, and it was just not a great experience. And so a couple of things that taught me, and we ended up, there was a big meeting very similar to kind of this room with all of us, and the CEO said, we don't have any more money, so go home. And there's a couple of things I realized. So one is, the timing has to be right. We talked about market fit a bit this morning. Like, there's got to be an audience. The timing's got to be right. The experience has to be right. And, it's funny now at Fullscreen, I'm kind of, what we were trying to do at Sudo 16 years ago is actually what I'm kind of building at Fullscreen right now. So I feel like I'm getting a second chance at it. But it was kind of too soon. I think that company, things can get overhyped, and we spend a lot of time and a lot of money, but if there isn't an audience there, it's just not going to work out. And we had an interesting product, but we didn't have a business, right? So one of the other takeaways I would say is you can have a feature. That feature might not be a product. And you can have a product, but that product might not be a business or a business that's going to last. And so those are just a couple of things that I reflect upon.
I can actually relate a lot to that. My story is a startup story, my personal startup. Back in 2007, I had this idea for, PhotoBucket was kind of big, Flickr was kind of big, but none of these photo sharing apps really let you tell a story. So I had this idea for a product that would let you tell a story. Not only tell a story, but would sort of capture time, right? And the product was called Capsules, and we raised a little bit of money for it. And it got moderately successful. It was a nicely designed product. But what we failed to sort of be open to was the audience wanting something different, or a different audience than we originally envisioned, having a different idea for how this product would actually work. And what happened was some teachers started coming to us and saying, like, this is really cool, we'd love to use this in the classroom. And I said, we're not interested in that. We want to build the next PhotoBucket, we want to build the next Flickr. And so we kept on that path and kept ignoring the sort of educational side of things because it just wasn't something that we ever conceived. Or thought that there was really going to be a market. And long story short, we ran out of runway. We left the product up, it's still out there. And it's still used by teachers, basically. But it's a low enough overhead that we just leave it out there and leave it running.
I definitely, I think what Josh was saying about how it sort of depends. I guess every product has its successes and failures. And it's all relative. So one failure to a product at a certain time might actually be a success to a different one at a different time. One example of many I can draw, let's see, my most recent probably was Yahoo Live, where we ran a concert every day. People like Justin Timberlake, Taylor Swift, for free, live streamed. This is before live streaming was really had its second renaissance. And it turns out that even though you might break records live streaming, you might have the most people connected to a live stream site ever before, it can still be a failure depending on how it's measured. So we had these deals that expected a certain amount of revenue and a certain amount of performance based on that revenue to get that revenue at the outset. And so this deal was prescriptive in the sense that it said the product would have to generate this much money day one. And even at some place like Yahoo, where you can reach 1 billion people, that still can kill a product because you can't iterate, you can't search for the thing and really focus on the thing that matters to really get that upper level of growth that eventually will probably draw those numbers that the deal expected. So I think the failure in that sense is not sort of consistently and persistently championing the goal of the product all throughout the process, to the point where you're like, bleeding through the nose. I mean, it's imperative that that product vision, that evangelism, that missionary that you are, persists and is applied in every sense and with every group of a company, even if it's siloed. I'm sure you probably experienced this at Disney too. But if you don't do it in one place, it can kill the future of a product.
I think we could just go on with Yahoo silo product kill stories all day long.
Poor Marissa, she's such an amazing CEO.
I can tell my Yahoo product death story. Never mind. But
it's actually still running, but it's not clearly. I don't think it achieved the monetization goals, up until later.
And salient point out of yours is sometimes your business goals, the business goals set for a product, may doom the product to fail. And you can beat your head against the wall as much as you want, but if you are not necessarily set up for success, you have to examine unto which you go into building a product. Startup, it may be slightly different, but in large companies, I've seen many a project funded that were challenged, shall we say, from the beginning. Jody?
Hello. I have a lemonade story. I worked at a company where they were a content company, a big content company, and they really wanted to own that relationship with the user for the first time because they've been making DVDs and it had been very, not connected to the user. So they're like, okay, let's get our movies out there. Let's start to have that relationship with the customer. So we spent a lot of time building this video streaming app that sold directly to the user. And this is before over the top, and this is before really streaming was happening on the phone, and it was just web streaming. And so we built it, we got it out there, we started to get a few users, and then all of a sudden, the partners that we had that distributed our DVDs and some that were starting to distribute our digital movies were like, hey, why are you competing with us? We're gonna pull your DVDs. We're gonna stop supporting you. And it got kind of really not okay. So then, we had to actually go in and actually, collaborate with our engineers and look at some different ways that we could continue to maintain that one-on-one relationship with the user, but also stand up and prop up our distributing partners. And so that actually was the idea for this back-end entitlement syncing technology that actually became the better product. So even though we spent 2 or 3 years working on this one product, it gave us all of the learnings that we needed to have in order to do the much better, more supercharged, better product. So
thank you, Jody. We debated long and hard if we were going to bring up a certain topic. But in the end, I think we decided that we would address the Pokemon in the room. You know who you are up there playing. Stop it. I was actually in a staff meeting where we were having to decide whether we were going to make a policy on employees playing Pokemon Go the other day, just so you know.
Oh, God.
Yeah, I know. It's reached that point. Like, seriously.
We're a Slack channel at Flipagram that's Pokemon Go, actually.
there you go.
Yeah, exactly. But in a very real sense, and we don't want to belabor and go off into the VR, AR weeds, but if we look at Pokemon Go, how many of you are playing it today? Great. How many of you played Ingress? Exactly. It's the same game. That game has been out for 6 years. Yeah, it's been out for 6 years. Same tech, improved slightly. Apparently they didn't improve their server scaling much, but that's okay. That's another story. It's the same company that's developed Pokemon Go. Underneath that, released it about 6 years ago. It was possibly the most user antagonistic game I've ever played, and very geeky. But it was
brought to you by the same people that brought you Circles, Google Circles.
Wow, you had to go there, didn't you? that talk about two past failures doesn't make. Never mind. Our bashing Circles aside, so 6 years ago they released Ingress. Nobody really played it. There's a couple of you diehard people. God love you. I played it for about a red hot minute just to check it out. It was an augmented reality game. Same infrastructure, same concept, same dropping virtual objects onto real world. Fast forward 6 years, add a 20-year-old IP to it, but a much beloved IP. An IP that people, young, old, it doesn't matter. And suddenly you have a product that just blew the doors off. So we talk about past failures. If those guys had said, oh, this is just never going to go to, it wasn't a bad idea. It just didn't have the right combination of things to create success. And now they've got lightning in a bottle. Now, I would say their biggest problem is, can they sustain, right? Can they continue with, and obviously they can't sustain initially because their servers, they had a huge server issue. But then they have to keep that going. Can they keep people's interest? Can they keep feeding the machine? So, they captured lightning in a bottle. Now their product challenge is keep that going. And you can, any of you that have worked in the gaming world, know the folks at Activision, biggest challenge of World of Warcraft, which I think they have done reasonably well from a product standpoint. So we steer away from AR and go to a game product. Is World of Warcraft has been consistently a successful and maintaining product in a field that is extremely hard to keep players. But they have managed to time and time again iterate, add, grow that product, keep satisfying their customers just enough to keep that going for an amazing amount of time. It's possibly one of the, I don't know, is it the longest running MMO, successful MMO, Marty? It's close. I think there's some other esoteric ones that are still going, like but we won't go into those. Thank you. Yeah, I think Ultima Online, actually, but from a sheer mass of dollars and people, I think probably WoW eclipses it several times over. But Ultima has been going far longer. So just something to think about in the product success failure categories. Then I think we look at, and we talked about this here, is the nature of products. So we have different kinds of products. I think we're all generally in the media and entertainment vein. But we earlier talked about Teslas, cars. We talk about Pokemon Go and augmented reality. We can talk about designing a better chair. When we talk about building products, and I think, why don't we just delve into that a little bit? When you think about building a product, what are those key tenets that you keep to yourself? You've developed different kinds of products. You've moved through that. But what is that you keep coming back to as you dig into this, from your career, from the failures to the startups that you have now, to progress that product, to make sure that you're not making those mistakes of the past, but you are learning from them and moving it forward? Chris, I'm going to pick on you.
All right. I think one of the things that we did during my tenure at GameFly was we moved from what had been a successful model for them in the early sort of 2000s to a more agile sort of framework. And I think just maintaining that flexibility, some of the things that Marty was talking about in his discussion about having the product vision, knowing where you want to go long term, but still maintaining that flexibility along the way to change things as you learn things. And depending on your business, depending on how much input you can have or how inexpensively you can prototype, I think different companies or different organizations are going to get that input at different stages. But for whatever your particular environment is, I feel like maintaining that flexibility and having that culture that can adapt to change is one of the things that I think I've noticed since we implemented that at GameFly has been super important for us to be able to move to a more flexible sort of approach to developing the right fit for our customer. And we're doing that right now with the streaming product because it is a brand new product, it's a brand new industry in a lot of ways. And it's by no means certain, who exactly our market is. On the one hand, you could think that it's a product for gamers. Well, it might not necessarily be a product for gamers because a lot of gamers already have like a console, PlayStation or an Xbox. So the value proposition of plugging in your smart TV to a controller and streaming slightly older games, might not make any sense, for a gamer, or it might. There might be something there that does. So we're still in that kind of really listening phase. We've had a product that's been enabled by advances in technology, namely, smart televisions and devices that aren't necessarily game-specific technology that have gaming capabilities, along with other, streaming movies and other capabilities like that. So our hypothesis is kind of like we've got this, there's a distribution now of these capable devices that can stream games. Now, how do we deliver something to people and then listen to who those people are and how they're responding to sort of start tailoring the product more specifically going forward?
Yeah, I think similar to that, the product lifecycle is something that constantly you need to reevaluate. I think you referenced observation. I think both Marty, and Ben talked about this. But constantly observing and trying to gain deep insight into what is the problem your users are having now, and what might they be having or should have in the future. Tailoring your product and recognizing that there is a first step to take. It's not necessarily the end game, and it's not necessarily even going to look exactly like what it is you want to do eventually, but it's going to take you there. This is the Tesla Roadster to the Model S to the Model 3. And so, for example, at Flipagram started as a tool to basically make slideshows from your photos. Massively popular, massive spike, 8 million users in a handful of weeks. But if you just rested on that, if that was the only thing it did, it would sort of just fall behind and people would stop caring about it. Because it's not the end game. What's happening underneath that, and I think as product managers, this is the struggle to really kind of take out and examine and be able to become a missionary about, so that you can evangelize this. What is it about usage of your product that really is connecting with users, and what is it really solving? Like, go below that. It's not just at the surface. It's just not, for example, Flipagram, not just people who want to make a slideshow. What's going on is you've got this proliferation of devices, media devices, that can shoot, capture, and share media at no cost. And once you open that up to the world, what is the advantage that you might have? Like in our case, it's everyone now can become a video creator. Right? YouTube at one point was offered, after you've created your video, after you've already discovered that you wanted to make a video, here's how you can distribute it and make sure everyone can play it across the net. And then eventually they kept vertically integrating and bringing in, how do you develop a video creator? How do you help them monetize, make a career, get them known, distribution? We actually have the creator from the outset. These are kids that are learning how to create videos and becoming interested in this medium without really intentionally doing it. But some, I guarantee you, will discover that they actually do love video and will begin wanting to look for a career, wanting to look for some reward, some connection, some audience. And for the first time, we actually have the ability to deliver that, and that's new, right? So this ongoing kind of recognition that your product has to evolve and change, and you have to be the ones that sort of unearth that and discover it and evangelize it, like that's critical. And so that might help solve tying this back to Pokemon Go, that might help solve the timing problem, given if you have enough runway. And they did. They got spun out of Google, Niantic got spun out of Google. I think Google gave them like $20 or $30 million. And so they had some runway to discover this, but eventually they did, right? So they started with something, they knew AR would be interesting, that the capability was coming, exactly when, exactly what mixture, clearly they didn't have it first. But they constantly reevaluated, what is it that we need, what are we missing? Pokemon comes along, Netflix makes it relevant again. My kids are all watching Pokemon, strangely. And overlaid with AR, it's perfect. And so they try it, it takes off, and now they have confirmation. Now the challenge is, how do they keep delivering? How do they continue to not be distracted by their success and keep finding the thing that's going to take them to the next level?
Jody,
Yes.
I know that you've been involved in developing a product over the last year that has some particular challenges, turning your design challenges on their ear.
Sure.
Well, you want to talk a little bit about how you're having to address that. As you said, I can't just build a prototype, or I have to build a prototype to actually see what I'm doing. So you want to talk a little bit about your challenges?
Sure. So in virtual reality, there's no real way to do wireframes that are actually going to translate into the 3D space. The user's no longer in front of the UI, they're inside of it. And so that has been one of the biggest challenges of developing product for VR. And the only advice really I can offer there is to budget in extra iteration time. And it depends on the talent that you're working with about how, and you, as a product manager, you have to get to know your team and your talent to figure out how much time is that exactly. So yeah, I mean, I'm an agile practitioner, and I try to keep on the story points and the spikes. And we're doing a lot of spiking in VR. So we're doing a lot of research stories and doing our best to get through it. I don't think you get around it; you just go through it. But I was gonna say one of the techniques that I go back to that's not about VR really. I worked at this other company, and they really suffered from shiny object syndrome. It's like, ooh, there's this new cool technology. Let's sell movies with it, and so they kept building products, and the products were flopping big time. And when I was hired, they wanted me to disrupt them, and I disrupted them by going, what does the user get out of this? Like, where's the user value? Why would I put this app on my phone? I have limited space on my phone that's going to take up this megabyte size app. Why would I put this on there? And they're like, well, to buy movies. And I'm like, well, why wouldn't? I mean, I can buy movies anywhere. Like, what is this going to solve for me? And so, really matching that user value to the business need, and I think kind of tipping the scale a little more on the user side, like. What Facebook just did with their ads, and however all the advertising people are up in arms that their ads aren't going to get the kind of views that they want or are used to have. But Facebook is valuing that user experience over the business side, and I think that's very smart. And so, one of the things that I consistently do in my backlog grooming sessions is I do a high, medium, low for the business value. And then I do Moscow, which is the must, should, could, would for the user. And usually the ones that are a must and a high are the ones that bubble up to the top, and that's where I'll work on next. And that's usually also how I plan our roadmaps. If I get 60% of my roadmap done, that's a success. So, because you're constantly, every sprint, I'm going back through that backlog and I'm doing that re-analysis of is this delivering user value? Is this delivering business value? And continually doing that. And things change. And that's agile.
By definition. So let's talk a little bit about challenges of being potentially a small agile startup, and then being absorbed by a large corporation, and suddenly finding yourself having to potentially shift gears as a product development person to think about the product that you were developing now having overhead, if you will. I'm thinking about Fullscreen. I'm thinking about, you've gone from, hey, we're this crazy internet startup, woohoo, to working for one of the largest media companies on the planet. And then what does that do to you and how do you shift, or how do you compensate for still being aggressive and trying to deliver the thing that that is making you successful, to now having that, which is, it's overhead.
Yeah, it's tough.
Don't do it.
So Fullscreen is majority owned by a joint venture called Otter Media. That is a joint venture between the Chernin Group, Peter Chernin, who used to run Fox, and AT&T. And so we do have, obviously, sort of very strong ties to AT&T, which is a humongous company, 300,000 employees, something like that. So the company itself is 5 years old. We actually doubled in size last year. I think we'll probably do the same this year. I think we're about 800 employees right now. But one of the things that made me actually want to go to Fullscreen was that it's sort of at this evolutionary stage of itself. Call it, going into 2.0 version of itself, where it's going through a maturation process, right? So it was the scrappy startup for a number of years, and it was successful doing that. And there's a certain energy and agility that startups generally have. But now it's about, we got to become grown-ups, and we got to do it really quickly, and we got to mature what we do, how we look at things, the processes that we do things, or how we do those things. But it's a fine balance, because you're trying to balance. You want to keep that energy of the startup and the agility of the startup, but you also have to put a lot more rigor into place. Because it's all about, it's about execution, right? We believe we have a tremendous opportunity in sort of the video space and the creator space, but we have to execute against that. So trying to kind of put in some more rigor, some more process, actually doing roadmaps, but being loose enough around those roadmaps to say, you know what, next month this roadmap is probably going to change, and trying to balance sort of big projects with all the little incremental changes. It's an everyday thing, trying to find that balance, and talking to people both who have been there for a while and are new, and trying to figure out sort of constantly tinkering with how you work and trying to find those small bits of incremental improvement and efficiency, I think is really important. I wanted to comment on one other thing, which is like the new shiny object syndrome. The analogy I like to use with executives is skyscrapers and elevators. So everyone always wants to build, and this skyscraper can be a feature, it can be a new product, but everyone gets excited about the skyscrapers. They're big and shiny, and they're awesome, right? Nobody gives a shit about elevators. I'm cursing again, I apologize. It's just the way I am. So nobody.
It's Saturday morning.
Yeah, it is.
It's okay.
It's either doing it in front of you guys or my kids. So it's better that it's you guys. Nobody really cares about elevators, but guess what? Skyscraper, completely useless if the elevator doesn't work, right? So I constantly sort of having these discussions about, yes, that's a fantastic big idea. I love that big idea. We got to make sure these elevators still work, and we got to spend actually probably more time making sure that the elevators are always running before we start thinking about new skyscrapers to build, if that makes sense.
Sure. It goes back to, almost every example we've done in one way or the other goes to the Pokemon Go, which is, if you don't, I'm just going to beat on that one. If you don't make sure your servers are scaled, you're going to fuck up.
Pokemon Go, what's actually interesting, and one of the other things that I think contributes to that lightning in the bottle phenomenon is it's parents and kids. There's a few months ago, I was actually thinking about this, why aren't there phone games, and there probably are, but they kind of suck, but why aren't there more mobile games where it's hide and go seek with the phone, and more games on using technology and phones to get kids outside? Because I have 2 little boys, and I'd love to see them stop looking at iPads and game consoles inside. I'd like to get them outside. So I think one of those things is all of a sudden here was this game that parents could do with their kids. The kids were excited about it because it was technology, and they got to use the mom or dad's phone. And the parents were excited because, oh shit, I got my kid outside finally, and we can go walk around and do stuff. And I saw so many postings of other parents on Facebook where it's oh, I just ran into 8 other parents with their kids doing Pokemon Go. So I think that's that sort of dynamic is something that never existed with the old version. I can't remember Ingress. Thank you. I mean, that was for geeks. And,
yes. Although I'd like to point out, you can play hide and seek without the phone. We'll talk about it later.
You can. You can. But I thought as a way to drive them to do that. Yes.
We could blather on like this all day long, which we probably will. But are there any questions, any thoughts, anything that people want to throw out before we continue to... Oh, wait, lady right up there. So the question, I'm just doing it for the purpose of the audio system. You're basically saying, hey, I hear elevators, skyscrapers, got to get the elevators, but then I look over at my competitor and they said, fuck the elevators, we're just going to put in the stairs and we'll do elevators later and our skyscraper will go up first. See, I said that word. Is that... Okay.
Well, if I could address this, I think maybe something to think about too is everyone's trying to build a skyscraper all next to each other, downtown. maybe that's not the best solution. What are they trying to solve? Is there a better thing you can do? And if you look at Silicon Valley, it isn't skyscrapers. Now they have their own issues. Their elevators are the freeways, although ours are too. But they've built campuses to enable something that you can't enable in a skyscraper, which is collaboration and being able to just like come down 2 floors, walk across campus, and go up 1 floor and end up like talking to the person that you need to work with. Very hard in a skyscraper, if unless you, I don't know, get 10 floors or something, then you still have this elevator and you're squeezing through an elevator. Like that's just that experience sucks, to do that. So I think sometimes when there's a shiny object, at least there's a focus on something that's of value. You might want to then say, what is a different, shinier object that appeals to the same folks, but solves it in a different, better way? And that's one way to avoid it. Now, I don't know that just saying, like, don't build skyscraper, that isn't necessarily the issue either.
You can build a skyscraper as long as the user needs a skyscraper.
Yeah, and
Presumably they want it, they're all going to them, but yeah.
I think you do have the challenge of, in direct competition with somebody, and you find yourself, oh, they may get there faster than I am. Are you building the same thing? In which case, the danger is, would it differentiate your product from their product? If they are like, I'm going to get my skyscraper up before you, but I'm not going to put in elevators, consumers would notice, right? I mean, and we're getting very little. A skyscraper without an elevator, I don't care how beautiful it is, somebody would go in there and go, yeah, but I can't get to the 31st floor without going upstairs. Your competitor may have got out there first, but that doesn't matter, right? Like, you can't necessarily say, oh, I've got to beat somebody to market, therefore I'm going to slight the product, because if you suck, being a close follower isn't a bad thing. And that's don't lose sight. And too many organizations are, oh my God, we got to beat those people that are about to market. Oh, like, you've got, it's sometimes the putting the blinders on and say, I'm going to ignore my competitor is fine thing to do. You've got to be cognizant of what's out in the marketplace. You've got to make sure that you're not just replicating something else. But knowing that and then getting into your lane and going and staying true to, I've got to ship this to the customer, whatever the consumer, business, whatever that is, and they're the people that I've got to appeal to. If my competitor gets there first with a better product, okay, but you've got to get there. And that's what I think people lose sight of, is they're looking around, oh crap, and they lose sight of what they're trying to do.
And that's how Apple runs their company. I mean, they're never first to market.
Even more so lately.
Yeah, but look at them.
Marty? Wait for the wait for the microphone. Wait for it. Wait. Okay.
So when I go look at the failures that I've had in the past, one of the failures that sort of stings the most was not, gee, didn't we execute the product the way it needed to, but I should have cut that product a long time ago. I waited too long to go to management and say, you know what, this should die. This should die now. Either we have to pivot as a company, or alternatively, this has to go away and we have to concentrate on other products. And do you any of you on the panel have those experiences as well?
Oh, yes. Yeah, I've been at quite a few companies that just, they hated the idea of killing products, features, like sunsetting. Yeah, they really didn't like it. And what I chalk that up to is ego. And typically there's some executive who this was their baby, and so sunsetting that feature, that product, is a stab in the back or in the front to that executive, and that means that they're not going to climb up the corporate ladder like they thought they were. And so there's, I think, a lot of ego around that, because and this goes for all of us, right? Like, you kind of burst something, like you feel very attached to it. I think the way to not get around that, but to lessen that, is if there is true collaboration up front, so that it's not one person's baby, so that it's a group, it's a team's baby. I think that lessens the sort of individual ego, and it kind of makes things easier to say, you know what, we were wrong about this, whatever this feature is, rather than one person having to say, I was wrong, and having to admit that.
Yeah, that's absolutely a cultural thing. It cannot be that, oh, hey, as I came up with this idea, I'm rewarded for it, and I don't ever want to see it disappear. It should be the culture. The culture should be the team is solving problems, and these problems, they come and go, and the success at one point will turn into a failure later, and we'll just be here and we'll solve it. The culture is there to continuously solve these problems. And yeah, I think you avoid that problem. I think another problem is FUD. So sometimes there's fear, uncertainty, and doubt as to what your product should be. And so you look at all these things, you're like, well, this aspect of our product, we just did this today, this morning. Actually, we were texting around, no, we just killed voice narration in Flipagram. We have all these users in Japan, they're really upset. And it's just like, you know what, we're not doing it in an excellent way. And we've decided that here is the other direction we're going to try to send product. And so what remains is, well, if we killed this, if you have a little bit of fear or uncertainty or doubt about what your product should be, now this other thing is that you can see some actual traction on, like how do you let that go? Like you can't, it's hard to. But if you can address the FUD around it, if you can get other players involved and have them understand and then do your job evangelizing everything, then it's like, we get it. You know what, sometimes we make these decisions and focus, and this one doesn't make the cut, so we're sunsetting it.
I think it's also important to maintain experimentation emphasis. If you don't say this is my idea, it's so awesome, we've already decided that this is an awesome idea, and so when it fails, it's a really bad thing. If you approach everything with a mindset of hypothesis and experimentation, it kind of lowers the. You need the cultural thing as well, but it lowers the failure penalty.
Yeah, that's great.
But also to keep it objective, I mean, you should be constantly measuring your product against the KPIs that you've defined. And if it's not meeting them, then you have to sunset it, I mean, or change it. So, I mean, constantly revalidating again and again and again is how I stay objective, because I got really attached to my babies. But yeah, I mean, if it's not performing, you've got to make the tough choices.
And I think, you know, starting with what you said, Jody, identifying KPIs early and having them agreed upon, like with management, with the people who say, okay, I think this is what our success metric of this is going to be, or this is what we're defining this as, and tracking that is key. Because if you're all doing the mad rush, but you haven't had that conversation, then when it gets into that ugly conversation of, I don't think this is going where it should, what are you measuring against? And you know, I've been on projects where they've gotten awfully far down the road, and suddenly the market has shifted. That market that you were building for was a year ago, and now you're suddenly like, well, now what do we do? I face this in my current work right now, where we may kill a project that has been 2 years in the making simply because we realize we have missed a window, and it's a very ugly conversation. But if you can back that up with the data or the agreements that you made in the beginning of the project, it does help. Because otherwise, then it's not it's we have to objectively look at this. I think the other thing is you have to establish you want to be a part of a culture in a company, and this doesn't always happen. Certainly in the gaming industry suffers this problem is when projects get killed, whole companies get killed. And that is brutal. And yeah, it is. I've seen it more times than not, and that's something that you have to be in a culture, and you want to seek to work in a culture where you don't go down that path, and if you do go down that path, it doesn't just collapse the whole infrastructure. It's a tough thing to do, but it's establishing a culture, and you know, if you think about your next startup or you're part of a startup, trying to focus on that, how do we keep going and doing what we're doing without collapsing if we have to pivot? Other question. You, sir, in the middle.
Are we on? Oh, there we go. So can you speak to the differences in building teams and satisfying stakeholders, the difference between a startup environment versus the large corporate environment, and the pitfalls and maybe methodologies to communicate inside there?
The difference is more PowerPoint decks. Yeah, I mean that's
absolutely.
Actually, I'm kind of only half joking about that.
I have nothing else to add to that. No.
I think, you know, big company, more people. It's just a lot more time communicating, up, down, out. You know, it's just you have to a lot more of your time as a product manager or somebody in product is about communicating what it is, what you're doing, what the goals are, what the status is.
I think it's like there's a difference in a startup is a little more symmetrical, so your communication is usually more amongst peers or friends, hopefully. In a bigger company, it's asymmetric. You're communicating, from bottom up, left, right, across geographies, literally sometimes, sometimes just in the company's businesses. In bigger companies, there's often going to be sort of cannibalization, competitiveness inside, so that requires you to have sort of a different kind of skill set, which usually amounts to some kind of PowerPoint deck. Or it's Google slide deck.
I think and it was mentioned in Marty's presentation, empowerment. I think that's kind of even if you're in a big company, if the team that is working on something is empowered, then I don't think it's fundamentally that much different than you're a team in a big company versus you're a team in a startup.
Yeah, actually at Yahoo, I quickly, with Yahoo Live, we staked our ground. We said, this is something new, it's a new business. And as best we could, we tried to get Marissa's support in just carving out freedom to do what we need to do, minus the terms of the deal that we already struck. But.
Well, yeah, we won't go into that.
Yeah.
I think if you think about it, and conversation's been going on today, which is the life cycle of companies that grows, and Marty talked about this, which is when you're two people in an idea, you're wearing a lot of different hats, right? You don't have a PMO, you don't have a product management organization, you don't necessarily have, you may be doing several of those different things. And if you're talking about a company that's growing from that into something, the challenge is that you will have to start developing roles, and people will stop being chief cook and bottle washer, because you can't sustain that. You can't have you can start with potentially your CEO or founder or your buddy being the bright person that is the product person, and you're the engineering person. But as you grow, you may need to bring in that product person. And that's the tough thing that I've found in transitioning from, growing a small company into a bigger company, or going from a small company to a big company, or vice versa, is as an individual, as a team, understanding that those roles sometimes are amorphous and sometimes are more distinct. In a larger organization, you will potentially have an established PMO. You will have somebody that's a project manager versus a product manager, and they will have distinctive roles. And somebody coming from potentially a startup is used to flowing between that, and that causes friction in a team that's like, look, I got this. This is what I do. This is what I'm supposed to do, and that's what you're supposed to do. And the reality is that in larger teams, you do need that discipline. That in a startup, frankly, you want somebody that can wear those different hats. And I see that's the managing it as you go through that cycle of helping people settle into a role where they used to do, I did that, and I did that, and I did that. Well, okay, but we need to hire somebody to do that now, because you can't do all three of those things effectively for us at our size. So how do I make sure I can take that away from you without, oh, that's my baby. I used to do this for trade shows, and I used to do that for the product. Okay, well, you got to let that go. And how do you that? And it's psychology. It's it's all of those things, and in the individual that you're managing through that process. How do they let go? How do they feel like you're not taking responsibility away from them, but frankly giving them more responsibility because you're saying, you know what, we're big enough. You're going to own more of this and less of that. So I find that's the tricky part is working through those phases, because if you don't, then you have employees that are upset, they feel unempowered, that's the tricky part. It's a lot of psychology when it comes to that piece.
And the leadership needs to know the difference. They need to know that that's what they need to. I mean, especially in startups, that's what I've been experiencing, is that they're used to doing everything, and then they hire people, and then they're like, oh wait, I don't want to let that go. And so having the wherewithal to be like, okay, I hired this person, let it go.
Put the product down. One more question. The question, I'll repeat the question, is how is globalization, and I think we started touching on this, how does globalization, multinational corporations, even startups where you may have a part of your team in Palo Alto, part of your team in Romania, developing a product. How do you manage that? Because I think Marty said, hey, co-locate. That's a great idea. Wonderful, but you can't always do it necessarily. Or you find yourself as an organization that even starts with disparate people, and how do you manage that in the product cycle? Is that
It's tough. So we made the decision at Fullscreen sort of during the development process for this subscription video on demand service that we were going to enable it internationally. That had to do with sort of the way that our influencers and our marketing was going to happen. That, you know, it was going to happen international, so let's open up the doors to international users. So, you know, on the benefit side was, you know, a lot more potential subscribers and users of the service. But it opens up a lot more, you know, use cases and edge cases, like how do you filter the content out appropriately for, you know, because what we do is video, so there's a lot of rights and restrictions around stuff. So we actually launched something that probably could have used some more work. Well, everything could always use more work when you launch it, but we then had to do a big project around international filtering just to make that experience a little bit better. So, you know, every new market, and we kind of just look at it as like US and then international. But it all, you know, there's more work, there's more requirements, I think. But on the plus side, it is, you know, you could be surprised and really resonate in areas that you never anticipated before, right? Because you've caught lightning in the bottle somehow, some way that you weren't even planning. So, and it opens up a huge, going international or going to more countries, it opens up your potential consumer base, right? I think the big, you know, 50 years from now, 100 years from now, when they look back at sort of this time in history and technology, the real story is going to be how we've connected billions of people, and how we've connected essentially 3 billion people in the developing world. That's kind of what's happening now, what's been happening over the last 5 years, and what will continue to happen. And that is just massive, and it changes the dynamics of everything, right?
I would say culture, communication, and budget.
Time.
So first, if you have a disparate team, even if it's one person in those different geos, and you're working together as a team, you've got to embrace that. You've got to be able to embrace the fact that I'm working with somebody who's in a different time zone, potentially different culture, potentially different language. That works into the communication. I think you cannot put enough value in effective communication tools between the team that the team agrees on using, and you know, there is that value of literally seeing you, right? The phone calls are horrible. Conference calls are horrible. Video conference, slightly better. Slack, and a pretty amazing, or any kind of instant messaging tool. Yes, there were instant messaging tools before Slack, just so some of you know. You know, the communication is key. The being able to talk to the team, to have those check-ins, to have those moments where I'm looking at you, we're talking about this, even if we're in different countries and different time zones. And then when I say budget, is if you're building a company, you have to embrace the fact that you're going to pull that team together. You're going to have to spend money on the fact that we have people in different locations. And I've seen too often it's, oh yeah, well, we can't bring the team together, that's too expensive. Oh, yeah, okay. But if you don't pull these people together as an organization, they can't work together. And there is, I always advocate, you know, that first meeting with a customer or the team, that's an in-person, get to know people, shake hands, break bread with them, because that then starts the cycle of being able to work with somebody. You know, but just never seeing a person, never actually having that moment where you can just go grab a beer somewhere is inherently difficult in those down the road when the times do get tough and the challenges crop up. And so you've got to bring those things, right? And I don't care what you're making, and I don't care what the size. You just got to understand and acknowledge those.
So if I might add, I don't know if we have time for this, but I might add from a product standpoint, I'm not sure what you're working on, but take a look at what McDonald's and KFC have done internationally. A McDonald's menu in different countries is very tailored to the local population, which you're going to have to do with your product. Even if it's digital, you're likely going to end up in a situation you need to localize. Now, on a digital product, thankfully, you have that opportunity. It takes time and effort. But on the other hand, KFC, massive in China, of all places. I went in business school, went to China, and like these multi-story KFCs exist. I'm like, oh my God, in our neighborhood, it's getting shut down, like getting replaced. There's like, you know, these. It's just not the thing. So I think sometimes you might discover that you're for some reason your product speaks successfully in the market. We were really big in Brazil, like who'd have thought? Yeah, I mean, so from a product standpoint, look at some fast food joints.
Well, with ending from Pokemon Go to fast food and KFC, I think we've now gone everywhere. I want to thank the panelists for coming out and sharing the stories and the war stories today.
Thank you.
Thank you.